for Music Education at Georgia College of the 2024-25 school year. We're very fortunate to have a young trio of musicians with us who started a podcast back in COVID to talk about music and all matters dealing with music. And from this discussion forum that they created for themselves, they developed a wonderful podcast called Relative Pitch that you've probably heard of. They're famous from coast to coast, and they're going to talk to us today about what they did and how they became so successful. All right, I think Lauren, you're probably the one talking to start with, yeah?
Sure, absolutely. I will just start with sharing my screen here with you all. So excited to be here and to present this. I think, have all maybe on individual levels have talked a little bit about podcasting in different avenues, but haven't maybe done something so formal about it. So I think we're just going to start by introducing ourselves. My name is Lauren Green. I am one of the co-founders and co-hosts of Relative Pitch. Personally, I'm currently based in Seattle, Washington right now. I am the community relations manager for the Seattle Symphony, as well as a DMA student in flute performance at University of Washington, going into my last year. Let's go, we got it. It's gonna happen. And yeah, a lot of my work is just very centered on community and being in the community, empowering community, and just seeing how we can bring more people together. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll pass it on to Anthony.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Morris. I am currently in Houston, Texas, as I'm assistant director of bands at Knoll Middle School, which is in the Sheldon ISD. Before that, I was at the University of Georgia, where I got my master's degree in conducting, and I have taught all grades 6 through 12, band and choir. And then, of course, all my extra conducting things of sorts. I'm also one of the co-founders and co-hosts of Relative Pitch. For me, it started as just a little text message thread for us, and it has blossomed to this. So, super very thankful for this opportunity to share what we're doing here. And lastly, Michael.
Hey everybody, my name is Michael Brown. I'm the lecturer of trumpet and director of pet bands at the University of North Georgia. I play with the Chattanooga Symphony and Opera, and I'm a freelance musician and teacher outside of that with my copious amounts of free time. I'm also the co-host and co-founder of Relative Pitch. I actually had the idea. I like to say that now because Lauren and Anthony are going to slander me later. So I'm going to go ahead and say I had the idea first. I call it. I am next to it.
Okay.
Right. So with that being said, Michael, why don't we go to our next page talking a little bit about the why? We always, whenever we talk about like podcasting and why we're doing this, we always start with why this came about, how this came about. So, Michael, you want to start and share about how this happened?
I do. So throughout our undergraduate experience, and then especially when we started splitting up and going cross country, because Lauren went to New Mexico, I went to Michigan, and Anthony went to Florida, we had to stay connected some way. So we would FaceTime each other. We would do Zoom sometimes because, we're professionals. And we would just have these 2 hour, 3 hour conversations diving into like, why do young musicians have to prove themselves so much in the field? Why do we have to show a relevance of pop culture and of like this kind of stuff? And how does this all tie in together? Like, how does Wagner relate to Hamilton, which relates to R. Kelly, which relates to Beyonce, which relates to what we teach in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and 9th through 12? So I was like, let's just go ahead and plop a recording device on and let's just share it with everybody. And I'll let Lauren and Anthony take it on from there.
Well, yeah. So our original, if you go back to our season 1, we kind of did a side by side season where we did half of our episodes was about a book club situation. And in fact, that was my idea. Michael just said we should record our conversations, but I thought we should have something a little bit, something centered around it. So the first thing was a book called Wagnerism by Alex Ross, which Lauren and I actually took a class in undergrad And it was a survey of 20th century music, and we read The Rest is Noise by Alex Ross, and we really enjoyed that book. So our first book that we wanted was Wagnerism because it was very new. And at that time, especially in 2020, Wagner and how, his very tumultuous life and controversial life kind of was very related to what was happening in 2020 with many different artists. So that was like the goal of our first season, along with having the conversations we would normally have on FaceTime with interviewing guests. So, like, our first goal for that first season was to bridge the gap between what we deemed as classical music and what we're going through in COVID time and as well as the social unrest. While putting some of the shining light on some people that really influenced us for the better. And so that's why we really started with season one, and it just kind of took off from there. Lauren?
Yeah, and putting this into context of like what this is, whenever if you're thinking about starting a podcast, and you should always start with why. I say this for anything, any project I do. I go, well, why am I doing this? What are my goals? And why should I be doing this? Because sometimes I have amazing like project ideas, but I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't feel right for me necessarily. And I think about if it is something that I feel like I should be doing. For us in particular, we were exactly the way both Michael and Anthony just explained. We were having these conversations, and we were like, we don't see that this is happening in other spaces in the way that what we're doing and what we're centering specifically. And this is something that was natural for us to talk about. It was something that was always at the forefront of our minds. And it just made sense for it to be us who did it. And also the fact that we are great friends, and we like have already this rapport with each other, an easygoing like experience. We all bring very specific things to the table, and we just worked really well as a team. So we just started by saying, well, we want to just talk and let's just see how things go. And of course, over time, your goals may shift, and that's a great thing. That means you're growing. That means you're changing. But at least within that beginning process, if it's something you're really considering, I would sit down and say, well, what am I trying to get out of this, and why should it be me?
hmm And I will say that the last thing for just defining goals, I think one of our biggest goals, as we've all mentioned, was our the reason we named it relative pitch. So first, we have a why of relative pitch, but why did we name it relative pitch? Obviously, for all the musicians in the room, relative pitch is something that you hear, and you may not have perfect pitch, but according to one pitch, you can find your way through that. So for us, we saw it as if the world through our lenses, how it is relative to us. And so that's how relative pitch, that's how we came with the name, because we were budding musicians right after undergrad. So it's like, well, the world looks different from our lenses. And, at the time, no one was, speaking what young musicians were going through or feeling about, what is their first job? How do you do that? How do you navigate that? How do you go to grad school? How here are the challenges that our generation is feeling right now. No one was speaking about that. So that was one of our goals, is to give a platform for that specific age range, but also reach back to people that are coming after us, and also to the people that have been in this wonderful job of ours, or career of ours, and let them give advice, but also kind of fit into our realm just as much.
Absolutely. And Anthony's hitting so much on like the what, which is the next thing I want to talk about. Like what is this podcast? What content are we providing? So much of that was also built into our why as well, which is very normal when you're first starting out in this process, that things are going to overlap because you're thinking about the whole picture of it. Um, for us, the what of the podcast was, it started off, like Anthony was saying, as a book club. It also was, oh, we're just chatting about different subjects. And then ultimately, it was like, oh, let's bring on people we really want to talk to. So it was a mix of things. For some people, it's very different. It's just two people every single week, right, who just talk about it, about different things, etc. Some people only have guests, right? Some people only do book clubs or book reviews. So thinking about what formatting really works for you, like makes sense. And it doesn't have to be one thing. It can shift, it can change, it can be various, it can be varied. And like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you providing? Is it music? Are you going to talk about music? Like, what kinds of, are you going to have pictures? Is it going to be, all these different things. So this is like the next step that comes out of the why. Absolutely.
Yeah, which is funny because as I mentioned, our first season was a book club, but we quickly found out that Lauren loves to read. Lauren loves to read. Me and Michael, maybe not so much. Like we enjoyed reading the book and getting to know it, but when we also have other lives, going on, and that's the beautiful thing about what we do. Like we are still out and doing what we do. So reading a full chapter book, and if you've never opened an Alex Ross book, his chapters are like 50 pages long. And so it was just a little too much. So we started to change that. Okay, the next season, we didn't need a book to center us. We found something else. So it is a-okay for you to kind of pivot or change. Things will change throughout the years. We're now, oh my gosh, going into, well, really it's our 5th year basically going into this now, which seems, it feels like yesterday we started this, but we have had us three life change, we change, we are still humans, and so the podcast change with us. So never think that when you start something you have to stick to that for season upon season. Keep it, you can keep going through whatever you need it to be.
And I'll piggyback off of Anthony. If you look back at season 1, we had the book, and then we also titled each episode before we recorded it. And then going from season 1 to season 2, we had a summer spotlight series of people we couldn't fit in during the season, and we were just really bam, 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 wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, highlighting emerging artists and emerging educators like ourselves, just a little bit older, but not too far out of our range. So they are entering the field, entering the next level of their field. And then we went to season 2. We're still naming our titles. And now, like season 3, there's a couple of times where we were just like, let's just press record and see what comes about. And then we listen back. And Lauren is amazing. And so is Anthony. I just be talking. But Lauren and Anthony will write down things every once in a while. And then we like debrief and like, oh, this is a thing that stuck out. Let's name it this. So it's like it went from this evolution of planning a lot of stuff. And we still plan stuff. But this evolution of planning of like, okay, we got to get our thoughts on board. And now enough happens in a week when you see a million 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, when you work at a symphony, and then when I teach 5th through college every single week, you're going to come up with stuff and you're going to find interactions that speak to our true daily lives. So I feel like recently the content has went from let's plan everything out and to see like what's approaching us and what do we want to speak on. And we still plan stuff out. Like we're like, oh, we really need to talk about this topic. Like around the start of the semester and in the semester, we try to speak to students like, hey, you're going to feel like you need to move the entire world in August. You don't. And then in December, you feel like your world comes falling down when you couldn't tune with a piano before your jury. It's not. I know it's going to feel awful, but it's going to be okay. And the same thing with educators.
Yeah, and I think this Michael highlighted such an amazing pivot to the next slide, which is who is hosting, who is your audience. This is so important. I've seen so many amazing projects and ideas be like thwarted because of the wrong people being in the room, right? Or maybe it's just the wrong combination of people who is in the room for this, whether it's like hosting or if you're having guests, all those kinds of things. Like you really should think about that. The reason I think that has worked so well for the three of us is the fact that we are similar in terms of our backgrounds, but what we do now and where we are is so versed, like, and we can bring in different perspectives into the situation. So it doesn't feel stagnant. It doesn't feel like we're just all saying, I agree, I agree. It's like we're actually going, oh, actually, this is how I see it. This is how I see it. This is the angle I'm bringing it in, which is like honestly so much more interesting. If you're driving home listening to a podcast or you're on the train listening to it, like when you hear multiple voices. So think about that whenever you are creating what you're wanting with this. Like what is the voice you want your audience to hear? And also, who is your audience? That is such an important thing to think about. For us, we knew starting off that it was going to be a mixture of students, obviously, but then with the guests you're bringing on, we're like, these are going to be people who just like this composer, or who just like this conductor, who just like this performing artist, and who's going to just Google search their name, and hopefully, a video of ours with them featuring them pops up. It could be so many there. It could be so many people, random people who we never thought would have seen it, sees it. So be very mindful of, like, first of all, who you're crafting it towards, but also the fact that other people still might see this.
And something that we forgot to mention in a couple slides back, but I think it fits here as well, of when you're deciding to do a podcast, the question of, is this going to be a visual or is this going to be only sound? So for me, I am a visual person. So I usually actually listen to podcasts on YouTube. So I watch podcasts more than I listen to podcasts, because for me, when I hear when I just hear people talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go. But I have to see people. I guess that for me, I feel like I'm with them when I can see them. And so when we started with Relative Pitch, I was thinking it was more of a selfish thing of like, there are other people who needs to see the interaction between us as well. So think about that, of who your audience will be. And to the question of who's hosting, what do you bring to the table as well? What is your views on certain topics, and how can you engage in a conversation where I guess all aspects can be covered? What I love about what we do here at Relative Pitch, we bring people on that have different perspectives, but we also say, okay, well then this is how we see it and this is how you see it, so let's find our way in the middle. And even when just me, Michael, and Lauren are talking, we often do that. We're just like, okay, well, maybe this, maybe this. Lauren is really good at finding the middle ground. She is like the queen of that, to say, okay, here are both sides. Here it is in the middle for someone to take in, to establish their own. One of my favorite episodes is actually when we had Dr. Cynthia Johnson Turner on, and we were talking about a topic, and she expressed her opinion, and I think Lauren was just like, well, I don't see it that way. And then she went on to kind of, explain her side of the story. And, Dr. Cynthia Johnson Turner said, wow, I never thought about it that way. I'm going to take some time to, think about it, to absorb that. Thank you for putting that into a different perspective. That's what I love about what we do, is that we're not stuck in our own agenda or anybody else's agenda. It's about learning and it's about growing. Because if we don't do that here and we expect other people to do it out in our classrooms, out in the profession, it'll never work. It just won't work. So think about how you want to format that and who you're bringing on when it comes to podcasting.
Correct. And I would, just like I was with the content, the audience and who like we bring on has evolved from day one. Like I think the first year we really try to be like, okay, we're gonna do like the pre-professional things. We want college kids to listen to it and maybe older. And then we evolved to be like, we want this to be applicable and easily approached by even high school kids, because we had a couple of cases where Anthony's high schoolers were picking sides. They were like, oh, we're Michael. Like, that's it. If you ain't Michael, you ain't nothing. Or we're team Anthony. That's Mr. Morris. That is Mr. Morris. Or no, we're team Lauren because she sits back and then she comes at it. So like seeing your audience, and this is what I love about us, we change. And sometimes we'll have an episode that we're like, that didn't, in our hearts and in our souls, didn't feel like Relative Pitch. Like it didn't feel like us. So then we make a more conscious effort about, okay, this is where we need to kind of like drive the boat a little bit, just to make sure we are like easily accessible to anybody. Like even if we have an 8th grader who signs on, like, oh, I kind of understand what they're saying. Like we're not trying to talk about these all highbrow topics. Like I ain't with that because I don't like to read and I don't like hearing words that I don't know because then I got to go Google it and it's a lot. Just being able to be like changing our audience over the course of seasons. And we've even changed it mid season before, just because
Yeah.
we're like this whole fall, it didn't feel like us. This spring, we need to like bring it back. We need to bring it back to home. And I think we have these certain guests that reminds us. Like one of my favorite was Kelvin.
Mm.
Uh,
Dr. Kelvin Jones.
Yes,
Hmm.
Dr. Calvin Jones. He reminded us of like just like bringing it down back to home and kind of like the roots because he talks a lot about that. And especially when we brought him to like Midwest and everything. And that's another thing I want to bring up. We have given a couple of presentations live. We did live podcasting, and each of them did different things. And they were targeted at very different people to sit in the audience and to support us and us to support them. So you don't have to lock yourself in the day one of your podcast. Be like, okay, we're going to be this people. We want to be very academically driven. We want to do scholarly stuff. And then like you get there season 2 and you don't want to do that no more. You don't have to rename the podcast. You just got to slowly put on those bowling ball things and you just got to bowl your strike again and just figure out what the future looks like.
Yeah, and I will say you never know who's listening, because I was actually at a conducting symposium and I was at dinner one night, and I don't know how Relative Pitch came about the conversation, but it came about it, and there was a gentleman I was sitting next to, and he was like, Relative Pitch. He was like, I he was like, you are one of the co-hosts. And I was like, hey, like that's me. And he was like, oh my gosh, I use your the video talking about vulnerability with my staff at the school that I work at. We use it every year for the beginning of the year, talking about vulnerability with the marching band staff. And I was like, what? You use something that we were talking about? And I will say that's one of my favorite episodes, that, and it was just me, Michael, and Lauren just talking, but we were talking about what vulnerability is and how it kind of affects us. But hearing that, you know, people are using that to have their own conversations. You just never know. And a person who I always look up to, and if you don't know this person, uh, Google. I love me some Wendy Williams. Okay. And one thing Wendy Williams has always said is that I am of this show, but I can also change my mind. So there are things that we could have said in first season where, you know, now I'm like, I don't really see it that way anymore. And that's okay. That is okay. For that just shows that you have grown. And it's beautiful of the growth that you have done. Um, so I always laugh about that. And then the last thing I want to say is, if you are going to do a podcast with other people, it is very important that you have the conversation with your other co-hosts about, okay, so we invited a guest and I don't personally think that it might have been the best for us. I think you have to establish a good working flow between you three or two, whoever you're working with. And again, luckily for us, me, Mike, and Lauren, we're besties, so we can have that conversation. I will. We had one time we were at Midwest in our Hilton hotel, and we was just like, y'all, let's have a conversation about Relative Pitch. Like, let's really talk about who we want to invite, who do we, you know, because they're an extension of Relative Pitch. Are these people really um, good representations of what our mission and what our vision is? Maybe not. Well, then let's go back and revisit some of those. Or when we go into the future, let's make sure that we all do our background research on the people that we are inviting, so that we all say, okay, yes, this is the person, we agree, things like that. So just be mindful of that.
And just like piggybacking off of that, as we move on to our next thing, is it's so important to know who the people you are working with are. Again, me, Michael, and Anthony are besties, and so we know how to have conversations, difficult and fun, together. But if you put yourself in an environment where you're not with people you can collaborate with, you're not going to get your best self and you're not going to get your best content out of it. So just be really mindful of who you are starting these kinds of projects with. Going into logistics, like, this is really important. Again, we have an educator who has been like teaching middle and high school and also like was in like doing his master's in conducting. We have someone who is also doing a master's in trumpet performance who is now playing for a symphony and working at a university. Someone who works at a tier 1 symphony in administration and also doing a DMA. You could imagine how insane our schedules are as individuals, but especially trying to like do something together, right? So you have to be really committed to saying, if this is something we're going to do, we have to, like, it's a regiment. Like, we have to do this. We have to set certain times. I know that the day before release, I'm sitting down, I'm editing, I'm putting it all up there. We know who the goals of who does what, and we know when it's going to be released. That's the biggest thing is, if you go into it being very like willy-nilly, I'm not going to use flexible. Flexible is a possible term, like a positive term. I'm going to use willy-nilly because willy-nilly to me is like, oh, it'll happen when it happens. And for some things, that's great. I think actually as a collective, we exist a lot. If it happens, it happens in a lot of terms. Not in this though, because we have built this audience, this rapport with people who expect things from us, and we have, given that to them. So you have to make sure that when you go into this, you're ready for a regiment. You are ready for all the things that it takes between recording to the release that it takes to like, stay relevant.
Yeah, for us, in the way our schedule work, what we have decided, and honestly, I'm surprised we have kept this kind of the same since day one. We record on Sundays and we release on Wednesdays. And that schedule might not work for you. I know other podcasts who they do not release as frequent as we do. Like we will, between a school year, we really never miss a Wednesday besides if it's a holiday. So you're looking at from September 1st until May 1st, through a whole academic school year, every Wednesday, Relative Pitch is releasing. So that means every Sunday before that Wednesday, we're recording. And that can be a lot for some people. One of the, I think it was called the Band Director podcast, they release every like 6 months. That might fit you. But they were also only interviewing other band directors, so it didn't need to be as frequent as we do. And so you have to find that kind of balance of what your schedule will allow, and if you bring on people or you want other outside opinions, their schedule as well. We have something coming. We're trying to get something done here at Relative Pitch this season, which will require us to kind of deal with our 3 schedules plus 6 more people. So it's like really, it's a challenge because you're dealing with almost 10 people's schedule, and hopefully we make it work. So you have to think about that when it comes to scheduling, recording, and releasing.
Correct. And just to give a little bit more background, we released 27 episodes last season. The season before, we released 27. The season before, we released 29. And then I think the first season, we released, give me 2 seconds, 28. So we went from 28, 29, and then pretty evenly 27. I think we also understood, more this year, that it is okay if we just can't do a Sunday. Because sometimes I'll pop up like, hey, y'all, I got this good gig, this really, really good gig, and we don't have a guest coming. Can we just – and then Lauren and Anthony is like, yes, let's highlight one of our shows. And this is what I'll say. Every time we don't record, we try to highlight one of our shows that we feel strongly should have more views. Because we think some of our audience may have missed it. People are busy on Wednesdays, and sometimes that's the middle of the week. You're either like, oh, I got it. I stayed up on my grading. I did all my emails. I'm chilling. Other weeks, you're like, oh no, I got to put in all my grades today. So we
Yeah.
try.
Yes.
We miss something, we make it up by highlighting another one, or we might reach back a couple of seasons. It just depends
Yeah.
on how we are in that day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's important. If you go back and look at some episodes, often than not, you will see Michael probably in his car, especially this no shade, no shade. Didn't mean to call you out, but I'm gonna call you out. Michael is sitting in his car with recording the episode. But that's just it. Michael is very busy, like as a freelancer and as working with the symphony orchestra. Like he is busy on weekends, and I mean, Michael has put many miles on his car, so
Ooh.
he's going back and forth. Again, no shade. He's going back and forth, but he still is like, this is a priority of mine, and let's make sure that this works. And that is the thing for us. I mean, I have never been in a car. I think I've always been in the same place. Every time in my chair in my office, I think Lauren has been the same. Maybe once or twice, I think me and Lauren, we might have was like at work or something. So we're like, oh, we got to do this. But if it's a priority of yours, you'll make the time. And then I think the last thing on this, it's important to be consistent in what
Mm.
you do. So for us, the consistency is releasing on every Wednesday. And if we don't, we still, that Wednesday void is not there. You're still getting something from Relative Pitch on a Wednesday. That's something our audience can always count on, is that Relative Pitch is going to have something on Wednesday, whether that is a new video, whether that is go check this out, or sometimes, if it's a Wednesday, like during Women's History Month, we'll say, here are all the women that have been on Relative Pitch that we want to shout it out, and we just want to, show all the accomplishments of things like that. So there's always some type of content going out. You have to be consistent if you want to grow your audience, especially using social media.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So we've been talking a lot about like the why and all those really amazing things. Let's take a moment to actually talk about software, equipment, all the budgeting and skills that you have to have for something like this. Let's be very clear. We didn't know what we were doing. Starting this off, we had no idea. We were just like, let's throw some on, child. Let's see what happens. But the truth of it, the fact that we are all separated when we started and like currently now again, we recorded on Zoom, and that's what we did. And we saw other formatting, especially because of COVID. Zoom has become such a reliable resource, and there are other software like Microsoft Teams and others, Discord, people use to record with multiple people and guests, and that's how you get around you don't have to have the guests actually come into a studio. It's just they can sign on wherever they are. Just finding what software works for you, what is cost efficient for you. Because we're students, we had like Zoom Pro accounts for free, and it was super easy for us to use. And the recording feature in there was also very reliable for us, super easy to use. We also talked a lot in terms of equipment. You can go insane, right? You see podcasters who have those crazy setup mics and all that, and you can go off. If that's the thing about it, is like you also have to determine, like, we put budget in here because some people, podcasting is their life. That is what they make their money from. That is how they get there. All those views and everything turns into money for them, and that's great. If that's the way you want to go, you have to invest in that, right? For us, we
Mhm.
have all these other things going on. This is something that we want to do and we want to share out. It was never about we want to be like Mr. Beast levels on YouTube. Like, that's insane, right? That's not who we are. That's not genuine to who we are. If you want to be two set violin and all that, go be two. Like, they do that, right? They have the money, they have the editors, they have the budget to do all those things, and they made it their life. So if that is something you want to do, that is what I'll say, is you go do that. But you have to learn those editing skills, because at first you're not going to have the money to pay for an editor, a producer, a script writer, your assistants. Like, you have to do all those things yourself, right? So if
Mhm.
you're interested in that, those are skills. Like, you have to learn like, what are the editing softwares. For us, you can easily use iMovie. iMovie is so easy to use if you're an iPhone user. and something you can just easily clip. I think there's similar ones for Google Play and Android phones and everything if you needed to, but there's such easy free software for video editing. TikTok honestly has made everyone a video editor now, right? Like
Mhm.
an extent, like a lot of our software gives us editing tools. So it's just about taking time and experimenting. Don't be shy. Try things. You don't have to release everything you try, right? You can just try things first, send them to some friends, and like see what happens. Yes, Michael.
So Lauren tried to be funny one weekend. So she literally called me, and I'm not looking the part today because I've been a little fuzzy. Redneck Thanos because I was freshly shaven. And then I go and watch the video, and there it is, Thanos, right on our little
That
podcast.
was funny. That was really funny. Yes.
To be
Yes.
funny every once in a while. And she likes to do a little extra. But if you want to go like, I'll piggyback off of Lauren. Lauren talking about like, you can go high tech and go low tech. Everything we use, and I hope I'm not cutting either of them off. We have a Google Drive account specifically for this. We upload the raw footage, we keep the other footage, and we keep the audio links. Then we have an RSS feed. You're going to need an RSS feed. And the reason why is because you upload it there. And for all of us, it posts to Spotify, Apple Playlists, Google, Amazon. Is that it?
I think
Uh,
so.
yeah.
But it's
And
like
so
all of them.
it posts to 4 of them at one time for us. So
Yep.
all I have to do, and that's my job. And if they don't come in right on time, don't say nothing. On
Mhm.
Wednesdays, I'm supposed to go in there and download and all this other stuff, and it instantly posts all of it for us through that one website. And then a YouTube account, that's Anthony's job, and Anthony puts up the YouTube so the visual of it all, and then that's it. So we have iMovie, Google Drive, RSS feed, and then you have to create an account for each of them, but you really don't have to keep up with them. You just got to make sure you can log back in. And then we have an Instagram and Facebook. So you really only need 4 to 7 apps or things
Mhm.
to actually get a podcast off of its feet. Now, what you want to do from there is between you and the voices in your head, because I know I talk to myself a lot and I have a panel. So, but the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities are those.
Yeah, and I will say that so for the RSS feed, it is a monthly subscription that you pay, and so is it $10?
I can't remember. We always do just by the year. We just bulk it.
Well, no, we were doing by the month, and Michael's car got a little low a couple times, and Lauren got mad, so Lauren just paid for the year. So I love that for her.
Oh, well, I think the monthly is around $10 to $15, so it's not that much. And then your YouTube. So if you want to go the YouTube route, um, you want to make sure things are consistent between the platforms. Since YouTube is not in the RSS feed, it still has to look the same. So for something that we do, we have entitled seasons, and we've talked about seasons, but you don't have to do seasons. There's many podcasts that just do episodes. Some podcasters on episode 401. But the reason that you have to give it a number is for the RSS feed so that it can stay in line. And so the same thing has to be applied to when you do it separately in YouTube. So whenever you type in season 3, episode 26, it is the same season 3, episode 26 that is on Spotify, Apple, and all the other podcast platforms. So for YouTube, the things that you would have to add, of course, is the visual element. So the actual video, you have to make sure the title's right, the bio of things, and something that we always do in our YouTube. So every time you go to one of our YouTube videos and you click the bio, we have exactly what the episode is about. But then we have a list of all the ways you can contact us, which is very important because you want that engagement between your audience and you. So we have the link to everything from our Apple, Spotify. We have our email up there. We have our Instagram, our Facebook. So all they have to do is click so that all platforms are gaining traction. It is very important if you want to do a podcast and you want it to grow. The traction is very important. So you want those cross platforms people clicking. There's a podcast that's like really big on TikTok. It's the Teacher Podcast, but they're in a studio. They have the boom mics, so they rent out. I believe the cost to rent out a studio these days is between $250 and $500 for like an hour and a half. So I'm sorry. First of all, we're not even the same geographical location, but that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So you got to think about that when it comes to your budget for your podcast. Another great thing that we use is Canva. Like this presentation is through Canva, but you can also edit videos through that. I've edited some of my own conducting videos through Canva to give it the kind of flash that looks very, very modern. So think about that. Canva is free, but if you want to do the extra things, I think it's a little bit more. But however, if you're in an education facility, most of the time it's free. So really find out all the things that you can do using your job or whatever you're in to see what they have, and then use it. Like Lauren, we've been using her school's Zoom account since we started. The Canva comes through, different schools things. So use the resources you have at first, and then once you're in a comfortable state, you can start buying and growing your own kind of arsenal for podcasting.
Absolutely. And this next, we kind of already talked a little bit about this. This goes into a little bit of like the what it is. Again, just thinking about what formatting really makes sense and feels genuine to who you are. And like if having guests on their works, or if it's just like you, or if you have a co-host and everything, just another thing to remind yourself, like what does that show flow look like? How does it feel like? When you have a favorite, I have a lot of favorite podcasts that I really love. And I have one that I listen to that's called Ghost of a Podcast, and it's like an astrology one. And the weekly forecast episode always starts out with her just being like, "Hey, we're back." And like, if there's anything crazy that happened in the world that week, she kind of has a very humanistic lens on it. And then she jumps into like what the astrology for that week is and everything. And I know that, right? As a weekly listener, I'm like, oh, I know what that show flow is. It's so important that your audience feels comfortable going into the podcast and being like, oh, this is normal. It's for us a little bit at the beginning. We kind of joke. There's usually jokes, punches thrown at the beginning, just to kind of get everyone like comfortable and warmed up. Unfortunately, usually at Michael's expense. It's okay. We love Michael. And and then we kind of jump into it, and we start talking about things maybe happening in the world, in our universes, of going like, oh, everyone give an update, like what's going on right now. And then that's how we kind of transition into talking about the really deep topics we want to talk about that week. So it's super important to think about, what does that flow look like for you? Maybe if you know how mystery podcasts and murder podcasts, they start off with like person dead, I don't know, in a river or something. Like if you want that catchy title, like go for that. That's not usually, I don't think, what we do. I think every now and then we joked. I like started off one time in like a news anchor voice, and it really caught guard. It really caught them off guard. It was really funny though, and it was great.
So crazy. One time I introduced it in the master's voice, looking across the azaleas. Today is a beautiful golf course. We like to have fun sometimes, and they do like to make fun of me, and I do claim bullying.
Yes, and it is bullying.
Yeah. And I will say, if you are more on the side of music podcasting, I would get well versed with copyright laws. It's very important because we've even have run into where in our first season we had music that was going and it was not copyrighted. So YouTube will actually strike your video. And it's very important for you to kind of just know that if you're going to use certain things and your flow might be, hey, we have this kind of opening segment, and then we have some Dvorak 9 to get us into our next segment. Well, I would check to see if Dvorak is in copyright or not in copyright. Sometime, we know the kind of basic law of it, but just make sure that it won't, because what will happen, your show will probably, the whole audio is gone now. That's very important to kind of just remember that, oh snap, I got to just make sure that before you think about how you're going to lay out your show, what is those transition moments like for us? Usually we always have like a joke or something. We never really use music per se, but we have something to get us into our next session. It's just not like disjunct where we're like, okay, so we just got back from a cruise, yada yada yada. So now let's talk about how things are going in the Middle East. Like that's not how we go. It cannot go that way. So think about the rise and fall of your podcast.
Absolutely. Just with time being mindful, we're going to jump on over to talking just a bit about branding and marketing. Basically, like we talked a little bit about the equipment and software we use. We use Canva. We love Canva. Canva's so amazing and so fun, and there's so much you can do on it if you just have the time and patience to imagine what you want. Again, this presentation we have is Canva. A lot of the presentations that we've given have been through Canva, but also like branding, marketing. What's your vibe? Like for us, we started off with like different, like, okay, what are our colors? Like what is the feel of our podcast? Like we have like what's our brand kit, all these things. And maybe it's too early for you to think about those kinds of things, but it's something that we thought about when we first came out, because it was so important for us to feel like we had a vibe and an aura that we wanted people to feel when they thought about Relative Pitch. We love this sage green color. We use it for everything. We like it's just such a part of us because of the vibe. And it's so we have, but it's also not just that. We have like a dark blue, we have that cream, sometimes we add in a dusty gray. So just kind of, and like the vibe, it changes, right, depending. Each
Mhm.
presentation we do may be very different than the other, depending on who the audience is that we're presenting towards or what state we're in. And then also like for marketing, like Anthony was saying, making sure that throughout the week, if we're not posting on Wednesday, and when we post on Instagram, we post clips now, usually of like out clips from the podcast on Instagram on like our stories, and it just in the feed, and we share it to our own personal accounts, and we like sometimes make it funny and like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe Michael just said this week. And that's kind of the vibe that we have for it. So just thinking about what are the best platforms to connect with your audiences for, and maybe different than ours. We also have a website. So it's about also making sure that we're sharing out the website and it's super easy for people to find and we keep it updated. So that's just something, again, it's time consuming and there's money involved in a website and having a domain and keeping it up to date. Absolutely. A lot of this took time for us to build up to. We didn't just start at the beginning and have all of this figured out. It's been something that has been constantly evolving and changing as we go through, and as we got stronger and as we got older. So it's just another thing to think about is like, what do you want your podcast to look and feel like, and how do you get it out there? Is there anything else y'all want to add?
Well, also about your brand, you have to remember you are the brand. So when we're at Midwest, the first thing that a lot of us hear is, oh, look, it's Relative Pitch. It's Relative Pitch. So they know, people know that we are Relative Pitch. We are the brand of Relative Pitch. If two of us is there and not the third, they're like, oh, Relative Pitch isn't here. Relative Pitch isn't here. So always be mindful of that. The picture we had at the beginning of the presentation was a picture we took at our CBDNA presentation, and you see the greens every time we present. You see that sage green, you see the grays, you see the blues. That is part of your branding. So every time someone thinks about Relative Pitch, they're going to think of this shade of sage. This is what it looks like. So it's more branding than you think. Oh, only in the computer. You are your brand. It's important for you to have that and kind of think about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our last slide is just kind of talking about analysis and reflection, just knowing to set your standards and taking time to look back over this. I think the biggest thing we've said is we have taken time to talk about where we were at in that moment. There's some things that happened in season 1, 2, 3, even 4 that we're like, you know what? we don't think that we're there anymore, and we actually want to shift and we want to change that, and that is okay. It's perfectly fine. Actually, we encourage everyone to always be constantly like reflecting on how you're feeling and how maybe that has shifted from your past self. It is, you're always growing, you're always changing, especially for the fact that it's three of us together. There's so much growth and change that is so obvious throughout our journey, and it's really beautiful. And it's just something to always make sure that you're checking in with yourself and feeling like you're being genuine about like where you are, and you're making sure that like Anthony was saying, oh, there was a moment where we're like, actually, we don't think that was really us. That didn't feel right. What are your standards? What are your goals? What are your values? Just make sure you're constantly checking in, not only with yourself, but if you have amazing co-hosts like I have the privilege of having, checking in with each other too, and just making sure everything feels right with yourself. So
I will say you got to reflect, you got to check in. I started this podcast with hair. I no longer have hair. It takes a lot out of you sometimes when you start a podcast.
when Michael did not lose his hair because of us. Let's
No.
To be determined. To be determined. And that's another thing, like making sure my thing with analysis and reflection and making sure you set your standards. The podcast needs to have good banter. You got to be able to like throw it back and forth, because if you don't, your audience doesn't get a glimpse of you or a glimpse of how you react. Because like how we react literally today, and anytime you see us in person, is the exact same we react when we're on Facebook and I'm having to block the slander. Like it's the same. It's always the same. And people have already started identifying us at like the conferences, like, oh, Lauren's not going to talk a lot, but she going to make sure she listens. Michael's going to talk a lot. It's like all these different things. So making sure you are your brand, you're always reflecting on that, and making sure banter is a good thing. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Reflection is the best thing that we could do as human beings as we grow. Reflection equals growth. Okay. So I'm as we're reflecting right now, going into season 5, it just shows that we're not the same little kids that we were. We've grown. We're in jobs. We are, in a new part of our life. And so, but how are we also going to engage ourselves in the future as well? It's always good to look back, but it's wonderful to look forward and say, this is what I see for us next. So think about that when you're doing your podcast. And if you ever need help from any of us, we are always here. You can find our information pretty much everywhere. Here's our contact page right there. Please reach out to us. We would love to just talk with you and just let you know, like, okay, here are some ideas. So it's been a pleasure talking with all of you, and I hope you gained something from us yapping for this last hour.
Thank y'all so much. I have learned so much. I think we might have time for one quick question.
absolutely.
Or someone wants to say hello. Hang on.
What's up?
Hi, Jay. Hello.
How are y'all?
Great. How are you?
I have one last question. How did you guys get to be so awesome?
Oh,
I think it was
Well-
Tina.
Because of-
I think it was
me.
Tina.
It wasn't Jay.
Yeah, I've said that
Well-
for the past 30 years, so I get that completely. No, I just want to say, hey guys, I'm glad to see you guys are doing well.
Thank you.
thank
That's the-
you.
All right, be good. Stay out of trouble.
We'll try.
All right. Did anybody in the group that's online have a question very quickly before we go? Not today? Well, I will say, actually, I have a question. So I told y'all before we started that we're starting a podcast through the Center for Music Education. It's about disability and music education. So we're going to be talking about various perspectives of how to and why to and all of those things work with disabled musicians. But we're looking at audio through maybe Podbean, and that will go to Spotify and all of those places that you said. But we're also looking at putting the video up on YouTube. Do you think that we need to pick one, either audio or video, or do you think that we can run them simultaneously?
Do
Run them
both.
simultaneously. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a person I'm a visual person, and especially the topics that I believe that you are all going to cover, I would want to see, what's happening, the conversation, how the interaction is happening, and it's actually way easier to do both, and I think it would be very beneficial for you.
And it's actually really accessible to offer both for people who like need that visual and also people who just want the audio. It's super accessible to do it. You could also like do captioning services or have there people who do live captions as well for you if you have funds and the resources to do it. But it's definitely with the what you're centering in your podcast, I think that's going to be a really accessible angle for sure.
Outstanding. Yeah, I was excited. My first thought was YouTube and doing video only, but I realized that I listen in the car.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And
go ahead.
I will say YouTube, they do automatic live captioning. And so, but it is AI, so you have to
Sure.
be a little bit mindful of that. You might want to just double check to see if the words are really what you said, because you don't want someone to be reading and they're like, that doesn't make sense. So,
Yeah.
but YouTube will offer that for you to do live captioning.
Outstanding. I'm so excited. And I did have trouble with the music licensing. That's why we're actually behind. We're going to adjust our release dates. It's going to be great. But we got behind because I wanted to use Sia's Unstoppable, but they were talking about like $12,000 to use Sia's Unstoppable for the season.
Yep.
And I just don't have that budget. So, all right, well, thank y'all so much. And I'm so excited that we were able to have you today. And the people who are signing in, don't forget to register for our next workshop on September 14th. We're going to talk about special education students in music and art. So if you didn't register for that one, go ahead and register and we will. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Love.
Awesome.
Bye, y'all.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Oh.